Hi, everyone. Deborah Hamilton. I'm so glad you're here. Tonight's going to be a crazy night because here in North Carolina, our internet is not necessarily working. So I might disappear altogether, and I apologize. Not my intention. You are joining the MAAP community call, and tonight we're going to talk about how to talk to your veterinarians. This is part of the MAAP community and the MAAP program because how you talk to people will dictate how your plan is going to be enforced or followed, because it has come to my attention by several people that I've been working with that when we co-own or when we have veterinarians in our lives, explaining to them or them even knowing what to do with our pets if something happens to us is often something we don't even think about. We don't even broach that subject with our veterinarians. So it really is a little bit of an issue that we need to definitely work with. So right now I'm going to check in with everybody. Connie, how are you? How's everything going?
We are fine, thank you. I am happy to report. And so far the weather is lovely, fall-like weather here in Southern California. And no natural disasters to report. So we're just chilling out and doing the normal stuff.
Oh,
So
good. Good.
nothing new and exciting.
Well, I have to say that we have fall weather here in North Carolina as well. So I'm really thrilled that you are having the same weather we're having. It was a little warm today, but maybe it's going to get a little cooler later on. Jeff, how are you? Welcome.
Thank you. I'm doing great. We're all doing great. Thank you. Nice to see you. Nice to see you too, Connie.
You're muted, Connie.
Sorry. Good to see you, Jeff.
Okay.
Even though we can't see you.
I know. That's okay.
Well, I don't shave unless I absolutely have to. So I look like Dr. Hyde. So
That's
Mr.
like my
Hyde,
husband. So. He went to the dentist today, so he felt he had to shave. So I thought that was good. So I just wanted to make sure that I checked in. I know that Susan can't come. She has one computer and her son needs it, so she can't come. I mean, it must be computer issue day. Sally is not going to be able to make it. Jan can't make it. She's running a program. I don't know if Kieran's going to make it. I'm hoping some other of our regulars make it, but I know this is a particularly pointed, so we'll keep it right on 7 o'clock so that everybody can get back to their life. This is a pretty pointed discussion, but really an important one, because if you buy from a breeder, you purchase from a rescue, you are co-owning with someone, and if you have a veterinarian, making sure that you communicate your plans for your pet, because you're the possessory owner. So if you co-own a dog with a breeder, and it lives with you, there's a possessory point that makes it more important for you. And so that's important. The dog will come with you. The dog will, change with you. It might be the place where you say you want your dog to go. So if Susie Snowflake has bred my dog and I bought my dog from Susie Snowflake, well, then I'm really going to be thrilled to return that dog to Susie. However, if Susie lives in Oregon and I live in New York, and the people who have known my dog over the last 10 or 15 years or 5 years are here in New York or in North Carolina or in California, and my breeder's in New York, having that conversation with your co-owner or your breeder who requires you to return the dog to them if something happens to you is really important. And everybody wants to avoid it like the plague, because it only brings up reactivity and defensiveness. Because, remember, Connie, read the contract, the dog comes back to me, and we appreciate and acknowledge that. Absolutely. The dog comes back to the breeder, the owner, the rescue, wherever. And can we expand this conversation to include the possibility that someone the dog knows, keeping the well-being of the dog top of mind, someone the dog knows or someone that the dog owner knows who they trust with the dog is close by and can keep the dog either short-term or long-term. Because maybe the person who lives near me who I would like to keep my dog might not be able to keep my dog when I need them to keep it. That's what happened to me with my ankle. Or they, might be able to keep it for a short period of time, but not a long period of time. So we never want to cut off our nose to spite our face and start a whole big argument and get into litigation or mediation or just, horrible discussions. What we want to do is we want to start with, when we're making our plan, hey, Susie Snowflake, I am making a plan for the care of Fluffy. And when I make the care for the plan of Fluffy, I know that Fluffy's supposed to come back to you. And I so appreciate that. And I want to let you know that Jeff and Connie know Fluffy really well. We go to dog shows together. We go to training class together. When I go on vacation, Connie always takes the dog. So I'd love for you to meet Connie, because Connie might be a person who could take my puppy Fluffy, short-term or long-term till you get there. And I really would like to leave that as an option. And I have never found a client come to my office because they proactively had a curious conversation. I have had many people come to my office because they say, listen, I'm going to give the dog to Connie. You don't mind, do you? Do you want to start a negative conversation, this defensive and reactive? Just tell somebody who has a contract with you that you're going to violate a term of the contract because they won't mind. And if you do say that and they say, no, I don't mind, make sure you get it in writing and say, okay, so here's the deal. I want you to meet Connie and I want you to know that Connie's going to take Fluffy. And I want Connie to know that if she can't take Fluffy or she can't keep Fluffy long-term, that she can then call the breeder. Now, these are really important nuances to deal with because most people don't even read their contracts. I know that's hard to believe, but I would say that of the people who come into my office with contract disputes, many of them do not read their contracts. They actually create a lot of agita for them and for their breeder, because their breeder presumes they read the contract or presumes that when the breeder goes over the contract, usually not in detail and usually not with the view toward having the new owner understand the terms of the contract, because I can honestly tell you that most of the time my owners who write contracts get together with 3 or 4 of their friends and pull, it's like a Chinese menu. I'm going to take a paragraph from Connie's and a paragraph from Jeff's and a paragraph from Deborah's because I like those 3 paragraphs. You don't check if they're enforceable in your state. You don't check if they're enforceable, period. And you put a contract together that may or may not be enforceable, period, or enforceable in your state. So it behooves you to find an attorney who's friendly, who wants to learn about making sure that they are making a contract that, hey, Roland, how are you? Good to see you. Making a contract that the buyer understands and knows what's going on. So the contracts don't necessarily get reviewed so that there's understanding from everyone. And when you're making that plan, that MAAP plan, remember it stands for making a plan, appointing caregivers, addressing the needs of your pet, and publishing that plan. When you're making that plan, if you don't consider the people who have a remainder interest in your pet, i.e. a breeder or a co-owner, then you're looking for trouble. So what I hope to do tonight is set up a few things and give you a few statements and then talk with all of you about how you feel, given the situation that I have my pet, I'm making a plan for my pet, I have a contract that I signed that says I'm supposed to return my pet to my breeder or my co-owner. I want to do that because I really like my breeder or co-owner, or I really don't want to do that because I don't like them, or they have too many dogs, or they live too far away. And there's a person next door around the block, a mile away, who I've left my dog with, who's more than willing to take my dog, and wants to take my dog. So these are conversations you need to have. It really is navigating that journey your pet takes when you can't care for it. And finally, the piece I want to include in this is you really need to tell your vet what your plans are. Because in reality and under the law, though many veterinarians do not stand firm on this, if they know Fluffy and they know Connie, then they may take care of the dog because they know Connie's good for it. But Connie really should tell the vet, hey, listen, if something happens to me and I can't get Patsy to the vet, then, you know, Deborah Hamilton is my dear friend. She lives around the block and she will be taking care of Patsy or Casey. And she might bring the pet in. And this is beneficial for two reasons. One is, you know, that if I walk in with your pet to your vet who doesn't know me from a hole in the sidewalk, they will know that you have given permission for me to make decisions about this pet. I'm sure that we'll be calling you as well. However, if it's an emergency and we can't get you, the vet can care for the pet and know with confidence that you've given the power of attorney for the care of your pet to this person who's taking care of your pet. Secondly, this is a group who know you and know your pet. So when someone comes in and says, no, this would never be what Connie wants to do with her pet, the vet can say, hey, wait a minute, here it is in the file. It says that if Deborah comes in with Patsy or Casey, that she's given permission to make calls about their health care at this time because Connie isn't away and she trusts her and they've had this conversation and they know. This is important for the veterinarian to know. Most people don't do that. Most people go on vacation, leave the dogs with in a kennel. And some kennels, the kennel I left my dogs in, did say, we need you to give us permission to bring our dog to ABC Kennel, which is really ABC Vet next to the kennel, not my vet, in the event something happens. Fabulous. I just left my dogs with a new caregiver who actually requested that I stop by the vet and give her information to them, which I always do anyway, but I was amazed that she was proactive about that instead of, I'm going to go do this for you. Oh, thanks. No, I really need you to do this for me so that if something happens to the dogs, they know I'm coming. So it was really, I felt very secure. And the veterinarian appreciates it too, because they know, A, the bill's going to be paid because you've basically given them permission to take care of the pet, that this person is going to say how to take care of the pet, and that's what you're going to do. It's an interesting thing that you need to understand, is that by law, veterinarians are only supposed to work with the people who they have what's called a VCPR, which is a veterinary client-patient relationship. And they don't have it with your pet sitter unless you tell them, they're standing in my shoes. I'm not going to be home. They're going to be caring for my pet. Please make sure that if they come in with my pet, you extend them the same courtesies you would extend me. And I promise I'll pay the bill, because most veterinarians, rightfully so, will not take your credit card because that's a little too much for them. So they likely won't take their credit card, but they will call you to try to make sure that you're going to cover the fees and do whatever needs to be done. So I've now talked for like 20 minutes, even though I was a little late. I'd like to get feedback from everybody on the two topics that we're talking about. Making sure you maintain the relationships with your breeder, your co-owner, and your veterinarian by being transparent, by having this conversation about the plans you've made. So I'm going to start with you, Connie. Have you had that? I don't think you co-own Patsy and Casey, right? Because they're yours.
Well, actually, of course, I am their sole breeder of record with the American Kennel Club. But and Patsy is solely mine. I did co-own her mother, Fanny, who is now an angel, unfortunately. But I co-owned her with my breeder, with whom I am still very friendly, and she lives in the area. But as far as Casey is concerned, I do co-own him with my best friend, whom you know, Bonnie.
Yep.
Because her one of her dogs was his father, his stud dog. So at any rate, and we did that mainly because both of us are senior citizens, and we did that, you know, for that reason, as a safety thing. But what you mentioned, as far as the vet needs to have authorization from you as the owner to be able to treat your dog if somebody else brings the dog in. That is absolutely, you know, it's not only a best practice, but it is absolutely mandatory in the state of California.
It's a
And
law. I'm
it
not.
is the law. It is the law, and a vet can lose, or an entire practice can lose their licenses if it is violated. And in fact, it is on the wall of my vet as you come in by the reception area. It's posted on the wall, the actual statute in the state code and the whole language of that law. So and a vet in California cannot prescribe for a dog unless it has been seen and examined by a vet in that practice, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So having done the MAAP plan before, my veterinary hospital has all the paperwork. And so they have the names of my friends, including Bonnie, who should, and she's number one on the list, who, you know, should I become incapacitated or I'm out of town or whatever, the dog can be treated. Now, I will tell you that when I am out of town, I always board my two dogs there for just the reason, in case of an emergency, if I am on the East Coast, if I'm overseas, wherever I am, the dog is in safe hands, and they always have an emergency number. And I always leave them my niece's number, who is in Northridge, and she is an attorney. So even though she is a public prosecutor for the city of Los Angeles, you know, she knows the ropes, and she is a dog owner. So you know, she is very conversant with all that. So in states like, for instance, California and New York, where you are from originally, the laws are very stringent, and so you've got to be very aware of that.
Yeah, and it should be. And I want to give a minute to Roland if he wants to introduce himself, because Roland is a vet tech who I had a conversation with today, who is really high tech in tech. And so I'm so glad he's here. You don't have to, Roland, and I understand. But I'm sure he would confirm that it is always better. I know that veterinarians, and I say this with all love and affection, will violate that term all the time if the dog is an extremist, because they want to help the dog, and I get it. They don't necessarily stand on ceremony. So what I try to do is set everybody up for success and no agita, because if you tell the vet, and because the dog might go to a vet that you don't know, if say they're out running in the beach and something happens and the closest vet is, you know, a mile away and your vet is 10 miles away, you know, they just might bring it to the vet. So that's always why you should actually also have a standalone document that says, in case of an emergency, this is my dog, but I give Deborah Hamilton the permission to see it. Jeff, have you ever been faced with that, and what have you done? Or have you done your MAAP plan yet? I hope so.
Yes, I have. And I have been faced with a situation. I was caring for someone's elderly yellow lab who suddenly became very sick after the dog's vet was closed. So I had to take the dog to an emergency vet without any paperwork, but because the dog was quite ill. They also made me pay in advance, which I was completely willing to do, and I completely understand.
Yeah.
And it was expensive, but in any way, they did treat the dog. Eventually, we got in touch with the owner, who gave, I guess, adequate verbal permission. and it worked out fine, but it did give me a scare. And it's one reason which drove me to you, Deborah. There's one other thing I wanted to say about co-ownership and breeders and so forth. It would be really, and I don't have only my spouse is the co-owner of my dog, but
oh God, that's a whole nother conversation. Listen to some of the other podcasts, but go ahead, Jeff.
Yeah. Well, we've been together 50 years, so I'm kind of not too worried, but anyway, but I understand. So I was also thinking, though, in a circumstance like that, it would be really good to have a contract with the co-owner or the breeder, language in the contract about what happens if you die or become disabled, to do that, to have that conversation early.
That is in your contract. It's called the first right of refusal. So if something happens to you, Jeff, then the dog is supposed to return to me because I bred it and I want it back. And that's why I try to have this discussion proactively when you still are okay and you don't need that triggered to say, hey, but wait a minute. Connie lives down the street. The dogs know Connie, and maybe, Connie will sign a contract with you that if something happens to her, she'll return the dogs to you. But this way, the dogs stay in continuity while I recover, or if I die or whatever. It's just that to have that discussion with your breeder early is so much less difficult than having that discussion with your breeder in extremis. Like, okay, so Connie's going to take the dog. No, wait, read read clause 5 of your contract. It says the dog comes back to me. And that's and especially if it's your family who's having that discussion, it's really hard. So absolutely, you're right. You should have it in your contract. It usually is in your contract, but this is sort of an amendment to that contract. So here you are, you live in California, I live in New York, you bought the dog from me, but there's a right of first refusal in the contract, and I am going to hold you to it because I want my dog back. So call me up and say, this lovely woman, Connie, has walked the dog when I haven't been here, has cared for the dog when I go on vacation. If something happens to me, I'd love for her to be able to have the dog. And she's willing to talk with you and enter into a contract with you that says if something happens to her, something happens to me, she gets Fluffy. And if something happens to her, you're called. And most breeders will do that because their ultimate goal is to make sure they get the dog back. That's their ultimate goal.
Now, let me, oh, excuse me. Let me bring up a point. We are talking about dogs who come from reputable breeders where there is a breeder owner contract. What we are not talking about is dogs who are adopted, either from a purebred rescue or just an all breed rescue. And
not a rescue that usually has a clause in it that says they have to be returned.
Correct.
And some breed rescues want them returned, but probably will never enforce it.
And that is the case of our club's affiliated breed rescue. I mean, they say, if anything happens to you, please, the dog should come back to us. That never happens. So that's a case where the adoptive party or parties, in the case of the family adopting, has to make arrangements with somebody, totally outside the dog's origins in case of illness or emergency or catastrophe or whatever, where somebody has to get a dog to a vet for medical care. So I just throw that out there because we're only talking one side of the coin.
Right. And that's an absolutely perfect point to bring up, because if you don't have anyone who's going to come to the aid of your dog because you don't belong to a breed club, or you don't have a breeder who's going to come and pick it up, or you don't have a neighbor who's going to come pick it up, it is ultimately up to you to make sure you find that. And remember, if you were with me, so many years ago, when we started this during the pandemic, I put 3x5 cards in my neighbors' post boxes to say, listen, I see you have a dog. If something happens to you, you get carried out with COVID. This is where I live. This is my telephone number. I'm happy to take care of your dog. And as a result, I had 5 or 6 people who came to my house, thanked me very much, and said, and we'll do the same for you, which was my ultimate goal, because I didn't have anyone in the neighborhood. If my husband or I were carried off, to take care of my pet. So it is something that you really, as you perfectly pointed out, Connie, you have to be proactive about if you don't have someone to care for your pet. Roland, I saw you for a minute, but then I know you're driving, so I don't know if you can introduce yourself and give us any of your thoughts before we sign off in about a minute.
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Yeah, I kind of joined late, so I'm not 100% what the subject is, but it sounds like co-ownership between a breeder and the actual owner of the pet, and depending on what happens to the actual owner of the pet while they're in the possession of the breeder.
No, while they're in the possession of the owner. So tonight's topic was what to do to set up your plan for your pet if you co-own a dog that has a clause in the contract that says it has to be returned to the breeder, or if you've rescued it from a rescue that has a clause that says it has to be returned to the rescue. How do you have that conversation that says, well, I know that, paragraph 5 says I'm supposed to return the dog to you. However, my friend Connie has been taking care of the dog for the past 5 years, 6 years. Every time I went on vacation, the dog knows Connie. And I would love to be able to leave the dog with Connie short term. If you live across country, it's not going to be easy for me to get to you to get the dog, or long term. And you can speak to Connie and say, listen, if something happens to you, I want to send you a contract where you know that that dog has to be returned to me if something happens to you. So it's that long-term care of the pet that we're talking about, Roland, when you're making a plan for the care of your pet, navigating the journey it takes if something happens to you. Most people don't have any plan for what happens to their dogs, cats, birds, horses, if something happens to them. That's what the community call for Wednesday nights is all about. We take a little sliver of something that could come up and talk about it. So tonight we're talking about that pesky contract you might have signed that says the dog has to go back to Deborah Hamilton because she's, this overbearing breeder. How do you have that conversation without Deborah Hamilton getting defensive and reactive? How dare you, not return my dog to me? Well, if you have it not in an extreme situation, if you sit down, have a conversation and put something in that returns the dog to them ultimately, but gives the dog the opportunity to stay with someone they know, it usually can be done without a lot of angst. And that if you're making these plans, you need to advise your veterinarian about the plans so they know. It's called publishing your MAAP plan. So if you make a plan and you appoint caregivers and you address the needs of your pet, your veterinarian should have something in his file that says, well, if something happens to Deborah, Connie's going to be in. I don't know Connie. She doesn't live in my town. But Connie will be in to take care of Deborah's Irish setters. And that's okay with Deborah. And even if her family doesn't know who's taking care of the dogs, I do, because Deborah has it in the file that Connie's the person who's going to take care of the pets, and it's going to be paid. That's what this discussion was about tonight, Roland. No worries about being late. We always repeat ourselves many times.
Oh, no worries. But yeah, I gather now. I'm not familiar with co-ownership between owners and breeders, but that situation comes up all the time when there's like a husband and a wife, or boyfriend and a girlfriend, and they separate or something happens with them. There's always some type of some type of legal issue between them trying to determine who is the owner. And usually we just go along with who's ever's in the file unless they have something that supersedes it.
Yeah,
But that's interesting with the owner and the breeder. I haven't heard or discussed that type of situation, and didn't know there was clauses in contracts once they're I guess sold into their ownership that a breeder might have a clause to say they would like them back if something happens to them. That's really interesting.
Really good breeders, who aren't in it for the money, will want their dogs back because they don't want their dogs to be ending up in a shelter if the family doesn't want the dog and the person who has the dog dies. Or is incapacitated. So in the event Roland buys an Irish setter from me, I want Roland to know, and I want Roland's family to know, that if something happens to Roland and nobody in his family wants this big red dog, and he can't care for it anymore, that I am happy to give the dog back, and I, because I'm crazy, give half a refund of the purchase price of the dog for the life of the dog. For the first 5 years, I give all your money back. And then after this first 5 years, I give half your money back so that I know that the dog is going to come back. It also looks good to the court that I'm not just, you have to give me this dog back, and there's no refund for all the care that these people have taken of this dog over its lifetime. So yeah, that's a thing. It's a thing. I'm happy to talk to your practice. But the part about people in a relationship and in divorce who then start to fight over a pet, that's a whole nother episode that we've had here, and I might bring it up again soon, because unless something's in writing, it is, excuse the expression, a shit show. Because usually both names are in the vet's file, and both people have brought the dog to and from the vet. I know my husband's name is in my file, but I would bet that my vet would say I'm the primary owner, but that's not true because we share our accounts. The money comes out of a joint account. As I said, there's such a shit show when it comes to, what I paid all the bills, even though I didn't bring the dog to the vet, you used my credit card. So there's a whole, it's not easy. And I do this for a living. So, and pets are property, unless you're in 7 states that have now made them a hybrid property where the judges are going to decide best interest, but that's a whole nother evening. So as we wrap up, does anyone have any lingering points that they'd like to make or questions they'd like to ask about the topic tonight, which was speaking to your breeder or co-owner about making a plan for your pet, and then letting your vet know that there are people who might be caring for your pet either while you're sick or while you're away, that you give them permission to bring them to the vet. Any other questions or thoughts? Jeff?
I'm going to have this conversation with my vet tomorrow.
Good. And he'll probably shake his head and go, why is this happening? And it's because you're really trying to support. And I don't know if Roland finds this to be a problem in his practice, but it really is there to support the veterinarian to maintain his VCPR with whomever is bringing the dog into the practice, because that person is important, that they know who has been given permission, if it isn't the owner, to bring the dog in to be treated. Roland, have you ever had those issues?
Well, it all depends on if they're on the profile. Like you were explaining before with a married couple or a girlfriend or a boyfriend, they would say, well, I've always paid the bills, even though this person is like on the profile too, and they've never had to take much responsibility. There is an option to have a primary and then just additional people on there. So that usually becomes the issue because they would think that they were listed as the primary. They're the one that's coming in, all the information. They're the one that's paying, but they were never listed as the primary. And when something happens with ownership, that's when the disagreement shows up, when we have to say like, well, this is the person that's the actual owner on our profile. We understand that you've been bringing like Fluffy in and paying for everything, but they're the actual owner. So that usually
in your
comes
records,
up.
right? In your records. So what this discussion was about, which is just a little bit different, is so if you're the owner, and it's not necessarily the husband-wife question, but rather if I have someone caring for my pet because I'm away with my husband or my wife, the vet needs to know who that person is.
Oh yes. It kind of depends on how the conversation goes. Normally when someone brings in the pet, we don't question, like, we don't verify if that's the actual primary or any of the people listed on the account. It's usually the focus is on the pet up until payment is needed. That's when it comes up on who's the actual owner, who's responsible, and they have to like check and see if they will approve everything and if they can go forward with the procedures or treatments that the doctor's recommending.
Right.
So
yeah, right. So you're putting the cart after the horse. I'm putting the horse before the cart. So before I leave, if something happens to my pet, that I'm going to take care of the pet. If you can't get in touch with me, I've already given you permission to allow the dog to be cared for if Deborah brings it in. And it is sort of the law of most states, almost 100% of the states. No, it is 100% of the states, so I will just say it, that whoever brings the pet in to be treated needs to have the VCPR with the veterinarian. So you can check with your veterinarians. I'd love to know. Shoot me an email tomorrow. Check with your veterinarians if they have to have a VCPR with the person who brings the dog in. And I would venture to say that they do need it. So that's why the proactive ability of all the people who come to the MAAP community, they know if I go on vacation, I'm going to tell Roland's practice who I'm leaving my dog with, and that they're able to bring it in. And, I will give them my number, my husband's number, so they can get in touch with me in the event the dog comes in, so they can get confirmation. But they know that Connie's bringing my dog and caring for my dog.
And again,
Oh,
again, Roland, this is Connie, and living in the state of California, it depends on your state too, and your state laws. As we went over in California, the vet asks up front, who is the actual owner of this dog, because it is state law, that there has to be an authorized party who is bringing the animal in for treatment, unless it is a stray picked up off the street, hit by a car kind of thing. That's a whole different ballgame. But
totally
and on the issue of who is the primary or the secondary party in a marriage or a domestic partnership or something like that, again, that depends on the state. As Counselor Hamilton will tell you, the state of California is a community property state. So it doesn't matter if the vet doesn't know your spouse from Adam. That dog is jointly owned according to the laws of the state of California.
California is one of the states that has just legislated that the judges are required to consider the best interest of the pet when they're divvying up property in a wedding. So you may never have seen me, but the dog may have lived with me for the past year and a half until we got to court. And under a case called, much more information than any of you ever want to know, Raymond v. Lockman, judges are tending to leave the dog where it is. So it might not be the person on the vet bills at all who gets the pet, because that's where the dog's resided for the last year and a half while we waited to go to trial. So it's a whole big, I'll be continuing this, Roland. So don't worry. It's an amazing thing, and it's quite crazy. So do you want to have the last word, Roland?
Oh, I was just going to say, to answer your question, owners would typically give us the heads up and let us know that they're going out of town, and so-and-so would be responsible for their pet. And it's a chance that if something happens, they'll bring them in, and it's okay for them to approve services. But I know what you all are mentioning as the law, but typically what I've seen just with the natural flow of people checking in their pet, coming in to see the vet, depending on if it's like their general practitioner, their normal vet, which I haven't been in for quite a while. I've been in specialty medicine for the past 6 years. If someone brings in their pet, they usually just check them in to confirm that's who is here. Like, Fluffy is here. They're here to see so-and-so doctor, and they have an appointment at this time. There's never any verification, at least in my state, to confirm point and blank, you are the primary. This is you in this account. This is your name, as confirmation. It's just like the casual flow of things that's normally not checked from my experience.
So I need to do a webinar for AVMLA on this, because it is the VCPR that's required by AVMA, that there be a VCPR with the person who brings the dog in, regardless of if the dog's been there before. So I'm going to double check with all my legal eagles on the American Veterinary Medical Law Association to get an affirmative answer. I'll keep you posted, Roland. I am of the understanding, and I've been known to be wrong, so I don't ever say without checking and double checking that in fact the state that you're in, which is where?
Oh, I'm in Illinois.
So Illinois is one of the states with the legislation for the best interest I think their well-being as opposed to best interest. They're one of the 7 states that have legislated judges to require. So I just wanted to, I'll look into that and I'll let you personally know, Roland, and I'll put it out there on Facebook and LinkedIn, because it is important that veterinarians know that their VCPR needs to be in place. It's a thing. In California, Connie is right. California is the land of no. They will make anything harder than it has to be just because it's California, sort of like New York as well. Illinois, maybe not so bad. However, AVMA, if you take a minute to go back, and I'm going to do that this weekend, put it up, and read the requirements of the VCPR, it will tell you that you need to know that the animal is the property of the person, or that they say they're the owner. You don't have to scan it, so you don't have to find out if its microchip says it belongs to Deborah Hamilton, and people lie, so we know that, so that's not foolproof. However, that covers your hiney, as opposed to, if they're going to lie to you, there's nothing you can do about it, right? Yeah, this is my dog. But if you know that this is Fluffy because Deborah Hamilton brings it in, it comes in with Connie, you really need to know that Connie has permission to bring in Deborah's dog and treat it. It's best practices. And as you said, Roland, we worry about making sure the dog is taken care of as opposed to worrying who owns it and where the money is going to come from. That's secondary. So tonight's been a great discussion. I'm so glad I was here. And until next week, thank you all so much for being here. And remember to make a MAAP plan. Remember to navigate that journey your pet takes when you can't care for it, and think ahead so that it's less defensive and reactive and more curious and responsive, so that we take care of all our pets. I'm Deborah Hamilton. Take care.